The text notification came while I was reviewing patient charts at the clinic. Dad's birthday dinner tonight, 6 p.m. Please try to make it this time, Mom. I glanced at the clock showing 4:47 p.m., then at the stack of overnight emergency cases waiting for my review. 3 surgeries scheduled for tomorrow morning, 2 research reports due to the university, and a conference call with the pharmaceutical company about our latest trial results. But it was Dad's 72nd birthday. I saved my work, locked the office, and drove across town to the house where I'd grown up explaining why I wanted to be a veterinarian instead of something more prestigious. Sarah's here, Mom announced as I walked through the kitchen door, still wearing my clinic scrubs under a hastily thrown-on cardigan. We were wondering if you'd make it. Traffic from the animal hospital, I said, hugging her. The familiar scent of her famous roast beef filled the kitchen, the same meal she'd made for every family birthday since I could remember. Sister Kelly looked up from her phone, raising an eyebrow at my appearance. Let me guess, another emergency with someone's pet? Something like that, I replied, washing my hands at the kitchen sink. Through the window I could see Dad setting up the outdoor speakers for dinner music, the same ritual he'd followed for decades. Sarah works so hard, Mom said, arranging dinner rolls in a basket. She was at the clinic until almost 5 today. Well, someone has to take care of the puppies and kittens, Kelly said with a knowing smile. Though I still don't understand why you didn't go to medical school like we talked about. Human patients, real prestige, actual money. I dried my hands with the dish towel, the same faded blue one Mom had used throughout my childhood. Veterinary medicine suits me. Brother Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his tie from his banking job. The animal doctor is here. Did you save any lives today, sis? A few, I said simply. Mark just closed another major commercial loan, Kelly announced proudly. 7 figures this time. That's wonderful, I said and meant it. Marcus had worked hard to build his career in commercial banking, and his success made the whole family proud. Real money, real impact, Dad added, joining us in the kitchen. Not that your work isn't important, sweetheart, he quickly added, patting my shoulder. But you know what I mean. I did know what he meant. For 15 years since I'd graduated from veterinary school, family gatherings had included gentle suggestions that I consider transitioning to human medicine. They meant well, but they saw my career through the lens of their own understanding: dogs and cats, routine checkups, the occasional emergency that interrupted family dinners. Let's eat before everything gets cold, Mom suggested, and we moved to the dining room where she'd set the table with her good china, the same pattern she'd used for special occasions throughout my childhood. Dinner conversation flowed through its familiar patterns. Marcus discussed interest rates and market trends. Kelly shared updates about her marketing firm's latest campaigns. Dad told stories about his recent golf games with retired colleagues. Mom asked everyone about their plans for the upcoming holidays. Sarah, how's the animal business? Uncle Bob asked, cutting into his roast beef. Still playing with puppies all day? The table chuckled warmly. It wasn't malicious. They genuinely saw my work as something pleasant but simple, like an extended version of childhood play with pets. Business is steady, I replied, taking a sip of water. We've been pretty busy lately. Sarah's clinic is always busy, Mom said supportively. She works such long hours. Well, animals get sick just like people, Aunt Linda added. Someone has to take care of them. Still, Kelly said, setting down her fork, I sometimes wonder what you could have accomplished in human medicine. All that intelligence and dedication applied to saving actual people. Animals matter too, I said gently. Of course they do, Dad said quickly. But you have to admit there's a difference in impact. Marcus affects entire businesses with his loans. Kelly's campaigns reach millions of consumers. You're taking care of individual pets. I nodded, understanding their perspective. From the outside, my work did appear to be about individual animals, one appointment at a time. They couldn't see the research happening in the background, the late nights analyzing data, the collaboration with human medical researchers, the pharmaceutical trials that might eventually benefit both animal and human patients. Remember when you were little? Mom asked with a nostalgic smile. You were always bringing home stray cats and injured birds. We should have known you'd end up working with animals professionally. Some things don't change, Kelly agreed. Still playing with animals instead of a real job. Everyone chuckled at the familiar joke. I just nodded and helped clear dishes, the same way I'd responded to similar comments for years. There was no point in explaining the complexity of veterinary research or the significance of cross-species medical breakthroughs. They saw what they understood and I'd learned to let them. Coffee and cake in the living room, Mom announced, carrying Dad's birthday cake toward the other room. I want to check the news before we start the birthday celebration. We settled into the comfortable living room furniture, the same couch and chairs that had anchored family gatherings for decades. Dad reached for the remote control, flipping through channels until he found the local evening news. And in medical news tonight, the anchor was saying, a groundbreaking veterinary research project at State University has earned national recognition for its potential impact on both animal and human health. I glanced up from my coffee, recognizing the story. The pharmaceutical company had mentioned something about media coverage, but I hadn't expected local television news. The American Veterinary Medical Association has awarded its highest research honor to Dr. Sarah Chin for her innovative work developing targeted cancer treatments that show promise for both veterinary and human applications. The room went suddenly quiet. Mom's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Dr. Chen's research into comparative oncology has attracted attention from major pharmaceutical companies and human medical researchers, who believe her findings could revolutionize cancer treatment across species. The camera cut to footage from yesterday's award ceremony. There I was, accepting a crystal trophy on a stage I'd barely had time to prepare for, wearing the navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. The groundbreaking treatment protocol developed by Dr. Chin has shown remarkable success rates in clinical trials, with several major universities now collaborating to adapt her discoveries for human cancer patients. Mom dropped her plate. The sound of china hitting the hardwood floor echoed through the suddenly silent living room. The research team led by Dr. Chin has been awarded a 3-year, $12 million grant to continue their comparative cancer studies, representing one of the largest research grants ever given to a veterinary program. Dad stared at the television screen, then at me, then back at the screen where my name appeared in bold letters under my photograph. We're joined now by Dr. Michael Roberts from the National Cancer Institute, the anchor continued. Dr. Roberts, can you explain the significance of Dr. Chen's work? The camera switched to a distinguished older man in a white lab coat. Dr. Chen's research represents a paradigm shift in how we approach cancer treatment. Her work with naturally occurring cancers in animal patients has provided insights that human medicine has been seeking for decades. The implications for cancer treatment across species are truly remarkable. Kelly slowly set down her coffee cup, her marketing professional's mind clearly processing what we'd just heard. Sarah, she said quietly, $12 million? The grant will fund the next phase of research, I explained simply, the same way I'd responded to congratulations from colleagues all week. You're on television, Marcus said as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. The national news picked up this story? The pharmaceutical companies are interested in the applications, I said, watching my family's faces as they processed information that completely reframed their understanding of my career. Dr. Chen's team has published findings in both veterinary and human medical journals, the news anchor continued, and her research has been cited by oncologists worldwide as a breakthrough in comparative cancer studies. Published in medical journals? Dad asked, leaning forward in his chair. Human medical journals? Cross-species research applies to both fields, I explained. Cancer behaves similarly across mammalian species, so discoveries in veterinary oncology often translate to human medicine. The news segment continued with footage of the research facility where I spent most of my days, the laboratory equipment that looked nothing like a traditional animal clinic, the sophisticated imaging technology that rivaled any human hospital. But you never mentioned any of this, Mom said, still staring at the television screen where my photograph remained displayed alongside impressive research statistics. You never asked about the research side of my work, I said gently. When people ask about veterinary medicine, they usually want to hear about the animals, not the data analysis. Data analysis? Uncle Bob repeated as if the words didn't fit with his understanding of animal care. Most of my time is spent analyzing treatment outcomes, reviewing pathology reports and developing new therapeutic protocols, I explained. The patient care is actually a small part of what I do. The grant funding will allow Dr. Chen's team to expand their research to multiple veterinary teaching hospitals, the anchor explained, with the goal of developing treatments that can benefit both animal and human cancer patients. Kelly pulled out her phone, clearly searching for more information. Sarah, there are articles about you in major medical publications. Forbes has a piece about your research. You're listed as one of the top veterinary researchers in the country. The pharmaceutical companies have been tracking the research progress, I said, accepting that my family's understanding of my career was shifting rapidly. Cancer treatment is a significant market for both animal and human applications. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? Dad asked, and I could hear genuine confusion in his voice. All these years we thought you were just treating pets. I am treating pets, I said. But cancer treatment requires understanding the disease at a molecular level. The research that helps animals also advances human medicine. Marcus shook his head slowly. $12 million in research funding. That's more than my bank approves for most commercial developments. And you've been doing this while we've been telling you to get a real job, Kelly said, and I could see her processing the irony of her marketing background compared to the medical research I'd been conducting quietly for years. Your work is helping develop cancer treatments for people? Mom asked, finally setting down her coffee cup. Actual human cancer treatments? The research crosses over, I confirmed. Naturally occurring cancers in dogs often mirror human cancers more closely than laboratory models. Successful treatments in veterinary patients can be adapted for human applications. The news segment concluded with information about the upcoming research expansion and additional collaborations with human medical centers. My photograph remained on screen as the anchor transitioned to the next story. Dad reached for the remote control and muted the television. The living room fell into contemplative silence, broken only by the distant sound of birthday party music still playing from the outdoor speakers. Sarah, he said finally, I owe you an apology. We all do. You don't owe me anything, I replied honestly. I chose not to explain the research side because people are usually more interested in the animals. But we're your family, Mom said, tears forming in her eyes. We should have understood what you were really doing all these years. You knew I was doing work that mattered to me, I said. That was enough. Kelly looked up from her phone, where she'd been reading articles about veterinary research. This says your work has potential applications for childhood cancers. You're helping develop treatments for children with cancer. Some of the protocols show promise for pediatric applications, I confirmed. Cross-species research often reveals treatment approaches that wouldn't be discovered through traditional human-only studies. All this time, Uncle Bob said slowly, we've been joking about you playing with animals and you've been developing cancer treatments. The animals are still the most rewarding part, I said truthfully. Every patient matters whether they have 4 legs or 2. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where we'd spent countless family gatherings. I make loans for businesses, he said quietly. Important work, good money, but nothing that will change medicine. Your work supports economic development, I pointed out. That matters too. Not like this, he said, turning back toward the room. Not like developing treatments that save lives. Dad picked up the remote control and unmuted the television, flipping through channels until he found another news program. I want to see if any other stations are covering this story, he explained. We found 3 more news segments about the veterinary research grant, each one providing additional details about the scope of the work and its potential impact. Seeing my name and photograph repeatedly on television seemed to help my family understand the significance of recognition I'd been receiving within the veterinary and medical communities. The research team's work with comparative oncology has attracted international attention, one anchor explained, with universities in Canada and Europe requesting collaboration on similar studies. International collaboration? Mom asked, looking at me with new understanding. You're working with researchers around the world? Cancer research benefits from global cooperation, I explained. Sharing data and treatment protocols helps develop better therapies faster. Kelly continued reading articles on her phone, occasionally sharing details with the rest of the family. This says you've been published in 37 peer-reviewed journals over the past 5 years. 37 publications. Research requires documentation, I said simply. Publishing findings allows other researchers to build on the work. I don't publish anything, Marcus admitted. I just approve loans and file reports. Different types of work require different approaches, I pointed out. Banking supports community development in ways that research can't. But I could see that my family's perspective on their own careers was shifting as dramatically as their understanding of mine. The work they'd considered more prestigious and impactful suddenly seemed smaller in comparison to medical research with global implications. Sarah, Dad said, reaching for my hand, I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you, but I didn't understand what you were really accomplishing. You raced me to pursue work that mattered, I replied. Everything I learned about dedication and persistence came from watching you build your own career. But we discouraged you from staying in veterinary medicine, Mom said sadly. All those years of suggesting you switch to human medicine, when you were already contributing to human medicine through your research. You wanted me to succeed, I said. That support mattered even when we disagreed about the path. The evening news concluded with weather and sports, and Dad finally turned off the television. The living room felt different somehow, as if the family dynamics had shifted during the past hour of watching my professional recognition play out on multiple news programs. We never really asked about your research, Kelly said thoughtfully. When you talked about work, we heard animal clinic and assumed we understood everything. Most people associate veterinary medicine with pet care, I said. It's easier to let them maintain that understanding than to explain research methodology and pharmaceutical development. But we're not most people, Marcus said firmly. We're your family. We should have been curious enough to ask better questions. You asked the questions that mattered to you, I pointed out. Whether I was happy, whether I felt fulfilled in my work, whether I was financially stable. Those are good questions. Dad stood up and walked to the mantelpiece where Mom had displayed family photographs spanning decades. He picked up a picture from my veterinary school graduation, where I stood smiling in my cap and gown between my proud parents. You were so determined to become a veterinarian, he said, studying the photograph. Even when we suggested alternatives, you never wavered. I knew what I wanted to do, I confirmed. Research was always part of the plan, even if I didn't explain it well at the time. And now you're changing cancer treatment, Mom said as if she still couldn't quite believe it. Our daughter is helping develop treatments that will save lives. The research team is developing treatments, I corrected gently. Science advances through collaboration, not individual efforts. But I could see that my family needed time to process the gap between their perception of my career and the reality of my professional accomplishments. Years of gentle jokes about playing with animals had created a narrative that was difficult to reconcile with $12 million research grants and international medical collaboration. I want to understand your work better, Kelly said decisively. Not just tonight but ongoing. I want to know what you're researching and why it matters. I'd like that, I replied honestly. The research can be complex, but the goals are straightforward, better treatments for patients, whether they have 4 legs or 2. Can we visit your laboratory? Marcus asked. I want to see where this research actually happens. Of course, I said. Though it might be less dramatic than television makes it appear. Mostly data analysis and careful documentation. Still, Dad said, replacing the graduation photograph on the mantelpiece. I'd like to understand what a typical day looks like for you. As we cleaned up the coffee cups and birthday cake plates, conversation continued about the research, the implications of cross-species cancer treatment, and the collaborative nature of modern medical research. My family asked thoughtful questions about the grant funding, the publication process, and the timeline for developing new treatments. Sarah, Mom said as I prepared to leave, next time someone asks about your work, I'm going to know how to answer properly. You always answered properly, I said, hugging her goodbye. You told people I help animals, which is true. Everything else is just technical details. Technical details that are changing medicine, Dad pointed out, walking me to my car. Details that matter to patients and families dealing with cancer. Driving home through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, I reflected on the evening's unexpected turn. My family's discovery of my professional recognition felt surreal, like watching strangers react to news about someone they'd never met. But perhaps the most meaningful part wasn't their amazement at the grants and publications. It was their genuine interest in understanding work they'd never thought to ask about, their recognition that my quiet dedication to veterinary research had been building toward something significant all along. The next morning, I returned to my normal routine patient rounds at dawn, laboratory work until noon, data analysis through the afternoon. But my phone buzzed throughout the day with messages from family members sharing articles they'd found about veterinary research, asking questions about cancer treatment protocols, expressing newfound appreciation for the complexity of cross-species medicine. Saw another article about your research. Kelly texted with a link to a medical journal interview. I'm telling everyone at work that my sister is developing cancer treatments. Found this piece about veterinary oncology, Marcus wrote, sharing an economics article about pharmaceutical development. Had no idea this was such a major industry. Your father has been researching veterinary medicine all morning, Mom called to report. He wants to understand everything he missed over the years. That evening, Dad called with specific questions about my research methodology. I've been reading about comparative oncology, he said. Can you explain how cancer similarities across species translate to treatment development? For the first time in years, I found myself describing the scientific details of my work to a family member who was genuinely curious about the process, not just the outcomes. We talked for an hour about research design, peer review, collaboration protocols, and the long-term goals of cross-species cancer treatment. I'm sorry it took a television news program for us to understand what you've been doing, he said before hanging up. But I'm grateful we finally know. 2 weeks later, my entire family visited the research facility. They toured the laboratory, met my research team, and watched a presentation about our current studies. Mom asked thoughtful questions about animal welfare in research settings. Kelly wanted to understand the marketing and communication challenges in medical research. Marcus inquired about the economics of pharmaceutical development. This is incredible, Dad said, watching sophisticated imaging equipment analyze tissue samples. This is nothing like what I imagined when you said you worked with animals. We do work with animals, I explained, introducing him to one of our canine cancer patients receiving experimental treatment. But modern veterinary medicine requires the same scientific rigor as human medicine. More rigorous in some ways, added Dr. Peterson, my research partner. Veterinary patients can't communicate symptoms verbally, so we rely heavily on objective data and careful observation. As my family learned about the day-to-day reality of veterinary research, I realized how much I'd contributed to their misunderstanding by accepting their simplified version of my career. I'd allowed them to maintain comfortable assumptions rather than challenging them to understand the complexity of modern veterinary medicine. Why didn't you insist that we learn about this years ago? Kelly asked as we concluded the laboratory tour. You never seemed interested in the technical aspects, I replied honestly. When I mentioned research, people's eyes would glaze over. It was easier to talk about the animals. But we missed so much, Mom said sadly. All these years of important work, and we treated it like a hobby. You treated it like work that made me happy, I corrected. That's what mattered most. 6 months later, when the research team published our latest findings in both veterinary and human medical journals, my family read every article. They understood enough about the scientific process to ask informed questions and celebrate the significance of peer review and publication. Dr. Sarah Chin and her research team have demonstrated remarkable success with their innovative cancer treatment protocol. Dad read aloud from the medical journal abstract at our next family dinner. The implications for both veterinary and human oncology are substantial. That's our Sarah, Mom said proudly, and for the first time I felt that my family truly understood what those words meant. The recognition and research grants were professionally satisfying, but having my family finally understand and appreciate the complexity of veterinary medicine meant more than any award. They'd learned to see my career not as playing with animals instead of pursuing real work, but as scientific research that happened to focus on animal patients while contributing to medical advances that benefit all species. Next time someone asks what you do, Kelly said, I'm going to need at least 10 minutes to explain it properly. Just tell them I help animals, I suggested with a smile. Everything else is technical details. Technical details that are changing the world, Dad added firmly. And that's exactly how I plan to describe my daughter's career from now on.